because I think that you guys are a very interesting pair here. I'm Lawrence Yang, I'm a family doc and also just a curious person in general. I'm not the subject of curiosity often, but I am very curious about the world and about how things work, about how humans work, about things like spirituality, medicine, wellness strategies. But we were just talking about how your lighting is very yellow, Anne. And then
yes, a true curiosity.
and you as a physician, you made a joke that it's like maybe you took too much digoxin, because digoxin, which is actually is a derivative of digitalis, which comes from some type of plant, right? And
digitalis is the plant.
Okay, and it was
the
used.
Foxglove, the common foxglove.
Oh, yeah, foxglove. That's
garden.
Right.
Ah, the foxglove.
Beautiful, and the bees love it.
The bees love it, and we used to use it in cardiology largely to kind of increase that anotropic push or the contractility of the heart. But if you overused it, people would be jaundiced. Is that right? Or what?
No, they'd see yellow.
They'd see,
their vision.
yeah.
Oh, they'd see
Christy
yellow. Yeah.
So it's not you that took it; it's us.
It's us that took it. Yeah, and I was saying that I had read that Van Gogh's Starry Night was due to an overdose or a higher dose than appropriate of digoxin. That's where that painting had come from. Yeah, it's interesting.
You guys should be on Jeopardy, like medical Jeopardy.
No.
Random facts in your brain.
Yeah.
Christy and I met on Twitter maybe about 2 years ago, but how did you two meet? And maybe introduce yourselves too. We'll start with Christy.
Sure.
You go first. I'm curious.
Yeah. Who is this girl? So my name is Christy Boyce. My background is in healthcare as a critical care respiratory therapist. So I worked for about 16 years in acute care as an RT, with about 7 or 8 years at BC Children's Hospital, working in the NICU and pediatric intensive care. And then did a bit of supervisory stuff there. And I was an anesthesiology assistant for a year too. That was quite the experience. And then I drifted over to adult care at a smaller community site in White Rock. And over the years, I kind of, had children and drifted away, did part-time. And then I always loved from the moment I graduated, I loved teaching, mentoring, preceptoring. It didn't matter where you put me in any job, I would drift to the educator role. So I ended up teaching simulation. NRP, neonatal resuscitation program, for 4 years, and also ACLS, advanced cardiovascular life support, and loved teaching. And eventually moved away from critical care into community. So I was doing community respiratory services, those home oxygen assessments, and all the self-management coaching with patients. And then felt like I really needed something else, and ended up taking the Master of Arts in Learning and Technology through Royal Roads University. I graduated literally this past month, finally got my thesis written and did my oral defense. And now I'm on the virtual health team and have a new role as their learning consultant, the virtual health learning consultant, which is a crazy journey. Right? So
you've just become a doctor in the past month.
Master's.
Oh,
right?
master's.
I'm a master. I'm not there yet. I don't have my doctorate. My husband flat out said he would divorce me if I went straight into my PhD. So I don't think he can have boundaries. He's got some boundaries there. So quite the journey. And indeed met Lawrence on Twitter, right? Before we realized we worked in the same health authority, I met you on Twitter.
Yeah.
And then I walked into the physician quality improvement fundamentals course and realized that was you from your photos, and then came over and gave you a big hug. And this was pre-COVID, obviously. And was so excited to finally meet you in person.
And you as well. I know we resonated a lot in many of our ideas about health professional wellness and burnout and the recovery of from the same, like the learning process about that recovery. So excited to have you on here. It's been like 2 years I've been trying to get you on to speak about this. Right. And how did you and Anne, because Christy, you suggested maybe let's get Dr. McNamara on here.
I know.
How does that happen?
Found me on LinkedIn, and I can't remember what post it was, Anne, but we were talking about leadership in some capacity.
I congratulated you on your new role. I think that was it. And our paths have crossed from time to time because your name was very familiar to me. But then when Lawrence said, you guys know each other, I thought, do we? Have we actually met, or has your name been, with the home oxygen program and at PSACH from time to time when I was head of medicine and things would come up that were quality related with respiratory and there'd be a voice in the background. I think it's been very background, but I recognized your name. And then when they posted that you had been put forward as this new job, I looked at your background and I thought, oh my goodness, another Royal Roads graduate. Was your time at Royal Roads life-changing, like they say?
Yes, completely. Yeah. True to the story. It was like, completely trajectory straight into virtual health. And I was at CRS, Community Respiratory, writing assignments on virtual health. Mm-hmm. And I just decided, I'm doing this research and it's secondary research. I'm just pulling things together and writing papers about, how to educate nurses on how to use virtual video consultations or virtual education. Why don't I do something with these assignments? And so I actually just got on Skype and found out who the lead was for the virtual health at the time, the virtual health team, and said, I have this research. Do you want to read this paper? And that just led to a very 1 day a week placement, which led to them realizing I was capable of more. And then here I am. So
exciting.
Was indeed life-changing. Yeah.
Well
it's great.
Done. Yeah.
And I think it's important that you introduce yourself to the listeners, and listeners could be anybody from patients to health professionals. Tell us a little bit about your journey to this podcast.
Mine.
Yeah.
Well, Lawrence and I have known each other for a long time. I have no idea how long, probably since you started practicing in Surrey.
Yeah, maybe 9 years.
Years, 2 years, 1 year. Mm-hmm. We've shared patients. We've bumped into each other in the hospital at frequent intervals. I am obviously not from here. I was born and raised in New Zealand, did my medical training and my residency largely in New Zealand. In fact, almost completely with the exception of 3 months. Got burned out when burned out wasn't even a thing. Being burnt out wasn't a thing. Yeah. But I went to the dean and said, I'm noticing these things about what's happening to me in patient care. I'm concerned there's a possibility that I am just tired and I might make an error. May I have a couple of weeks leave of absence? And then I'll know. Oh. He said, oh, for heaven's sake, this is why we should not let women into medicine.
Oh my gosh.
So then I had to resign because I wasn't allowed to take time off, and I knew that would be the right thing to do. I was traveling. I was staying with a boyfriend in Seattle. Who knew? And visited Vancouver whilst there. And one of my other friends was here and said, well, why don't you do your last 3 months of your FRECP in Vancouver? It's a great place. And it is. And it was just too easy. Doors just opened and I thought, okay. And then I did the exams and then I did some research and I'm still on holiday. I just haven't gone home yet. I mean, really often it feels like that.
Oh, wow.
I love my work. I did some fantastic time in respiratory research with Peter Paré, Bob Schellenberg. I wasn't directly working with Jim Hogg, but I directly worked with Peter and Bob. Wonderful leaders with a huge ability to nurture curiosity and inquisitiveness in young people. But yeah, then Eric and I got married, and now I'm here. I started work at Surrey in 1993 or 4, or whenever it was we got married. He doesn't mind that I forget this sometimes, the exact 28 years ago. And then last year I did this 6-month graduate certificate in executive coaching, having realized that I'd been inadvertently coaching when I was head of Department of Medicine. It was such an aha moment to go to a thing and have somebody describe the style of leadership. And I thought, oh my goodness, maybe this is why the Department of Medicine were just so cool, that they responded. And everybody was it was the most reassuring work I've ever done in medicine, to know that every member of that department had their heart firmly in the hands of the people, or vice versa. So here I am. I still have privileges, but I haven't worked as a doctor for about a year, and I think I will not again, because I want to move forwards, switch that passion for helping people a little bit at a time to my people instead of strangers.
Oh, that's great. That's a great story. I love it. Yeah. It sounds very similar to, it's very similar to my transition out of patient care to my patient care transition out of acute into community. In between there was where my trauma experience occurred at the hands of a poor leader. And that resulted for me in a 6-month stress leave for a person who had never been anxious in her life. And in fact, was very unsure what anxiety even was, right? Like, I don't understand why you don't just calm down, was my thinking before, right? Like, can't you just calm down, right? You're an RT, you're called, I would sit on a shift with a pager on and I would go to high risk recess all day. There was no space in my life for anxiety, but I had that experience at the hands of a leader who just destroyed me in the matter of 5 or 6 months. And I remember one day walking into work and just being in the same building. I actually lost my ability to form words that day. And later found myself staring at an Excel spreadsheet, which was probably just respiratory equipment related, just tallying up stock. Just realizing I was crying without realizing I had been crying for 5 minutes. Wow. Just completely broken. And so you don't understand until you're there, and the triggers are your own and unique to the chemistry, I think. But yeah, like, the rebirth that came out of my counseling experience and my 6-month off was incredible and sent me off on a new trajectory, much like yours, Will. You just found yourself in a new space that you actually needed to be in. Yeah. So your path ended up changing without any thought going into it, but the universe put something in your way and adjusted your path for you. Very similar.
Yeah. I very much believe that. And I think that our leaders, we have some brilliant leaders and some compassionate and ever-bearing leaders. And over the years, I think in medicine in the wider view, people have become leaders because they're good at what they do. They're good at the technical skills of their first job. And in medicine, people are popped in a leadership role with, much like teaching, with zero leadership skill development. And in no other industry or business does this happen. It's curious. I mean, my experience was from the dark ages, but the difficulties are still there for people. And I think there is change afoot. Yeah.
That's good. And I think, us speaking about our experiences too, right? Like, I would never, now I just think of this individual and I think, oh, thank God for her. Whereas in the moment I was traumatized and had my life ripped away from me and just couldn't even function to get my children in the car in the morning. When I took my 6 month off, if I could get them in the car without having a panic attack to get to school in the morning, that was a good thing. That was success. And going through that was so, like, to be pushed out of a community hospital where I felt like everyone knew me and I knew them by first name. And I loved that place. There wasn't a day I went into that site thinking, I would go in and I'm like, oh, I'm so excited to go to work today. Every day is different. I love this place. I love these people. And to be ripped away from that community at the hands of a leader, just due to her style, and to be targeted was absolutely traumatic for me. I lost my identity. I lost all faith in my ability to do anything. All confidence was gone. I thought that was my path, right? Like, I thought, this is my path. This is my plan. I'm meant to be in this job role, and this is where I'm supposed to be. And it was a brilliantly horrific, traumatic redirection that I didn't see coming, but now I would never give it up for anything in the world, because it will change you. Yeah.
Does it make it easier to develop personal self-awareness or insight into your own mind, your own biases, your own processes? Is it easier to start looking more objectively at oneself when there's been some kind of real harsh reality bite you?
Mm-hmm. It felt like it to me. I mean, I needed help, and I worked with a counselor before, so I found someone that I connected with, and I did throw myself into it. I throw myself into most things intensely, but I threw myself into the counseling. I said, "Do with me what you will, like, help," right? And he had a very inner child approach, right? So splitting you into your ego, your inner child, your spirit, and your current body. And that ego work was incredibly intense. And there were moments where, he would ask me to conjure up. There was one session where he asked me to conjure up, let's talk about your ego and conjure up what you think your ego might look like. That voice inside your head. I want you to think about, what does that voice look like if it had a body? What would it be its shape? What would be its size? And I remember sitting on the couch and conjuring up this massive creature, which was very a male in its gender, and huge, like 9 feet tall, kind of cowering like in the corner. And then he said, okay, so when you're ready, if you're ready, I want you to turn and look in the corner, and I want you to walk to the corner, and I want you to step into the body of your ego. And I did. And when I did, my entire body posture just changed. I suddenly stood up straight, and I crossed my arms, and I was disgusted because I was visioning myself on the couch, cowering and afraid and lost. And he said, and then he started addressing me as my ego. He said, so ego, can you see that, Christy she's here, she's exhausted, she doesn't know what to do, she's lost. What do you have to say to her? And out of my mouth came this voice that said, I am disgusted with her. She will never be enough. She will never work hard enough. She will never be good enough. She will never be fast enough. She needs to work harder. Which is insane, right? My whole life I'd thought that something was chasing me and making me achieve, right? Forcing me to do more schooling. Let's move into this new job role. Okay, let's become an instructor here, and let's work in this space, and let's learn how to do pediatrics, and the whole, my entire life since childhood, I felt like something was chasing me. And that day I realized it was me that was chasing me, and the control that I now had to instantaneously stop that voice was just immense. So it was a life-changing moment for me. It was incredible. So I threw myself into that counseling, and I don't know that everyone has had that opportunity, but to really frankly look at the voice inside your head and say, this is me. Why is that voice saying that? It's very protective. But it brought like an instantaneous shift in my ability to be vulnerable, to fail, to not be perfect, and walk away from perfectionism. So it's remarkable.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. You're right. I don't think many of us get that opportunity to have that type of reflection and to have that type of therapeutic visualization and experience. It sounds like you literally stood up and you walked to the corner of the room.
I did.
And wow.
And my whole body posture just changed. And I realized like, oh, this is the voice, but it's just me. It's this driving force. We all have, like, you come into this world and like, look at your children when they're born. They're just these sparks of light and gorgeous beauty and joy. And then they move through life and there's just stuff dumped upon us when we're little. It comes from every angle. And for me, it came as a voice from a family member who told me my entire childhood I wasn't worthy, and not in such kind words. And so my whole purpose became to prove that I was worthy in every shape or form. And that impacts every interaction. So if I was in a position of leadership or a position where I'm instructing or teaching, that impacts how you speak to and interact with everyone around you, right? So an awareness of that has like now disseminated through every single approach in every relationship of my life, particularly at work, allowing myself to be vulnerable and make mistakes, placing myself in a space of empathy and unarmoring myself, because I don't have to be perfect anymore, right? Yeah, it's interesting.
That imperfection is just such a relief. I think there are many, many, many individuals in medicine and in lots of caring professions, medicine and teaching, I guess I'm thinking, where people are very, very driven by a sense of a need that they're never quite good enough. And when we allow that sense, when we allow ourselves to put that on others, if I'm teaching Lawrence how to put in a chest tube or something, if Lawrence does it okay, then that's good. This is great. And it's not my job to try to have Lawrence do things exactly the way I would or exactly the way the perfect chest tube would go. It's my job as a teacher to teach somebody to be curious about the whole process, to care about what they're doing, to think about what they're doing as they're doing it, to kind of enjoy it and want to be as kind about it as they can. And I think that there's tons of people in medicine who are hampered in our relationships and in our world and in patient care, and particularly in teams and leadership, by this whole idea that if I say or do anything, it better be right. Otherwise, I'm a failure. So, when a patient is we were talking about something earlier today about patient care, and I was thinking, at some point in my career, I'd have a few really difficult patients, and I would say to one of them, we're kind of running a bit short on time here, and I'm not certain what the best answer is. Do you mind if I take your stuff with me this evening? And I look stuff up and I talk to a couple of colleagues, and then I come back to you in a day or two. And the response is like, oh, would you do that for me? Really?
Mm-hmm.
And, and in saying that, I'm thinking, oh, they're going to think I'm such an idiot. They're going to think that I am the most useless doctor because I don't have the answer. And such a relief to be allowed to say that sort of thing and to be allowed to be imperfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes
imperfect.
It's very imperfect, and that's okay, right? Like, that level of, I had a brilliant session this morning with our educator community of practice at Fraser Health. And we talked about this new expectation of being able to teach online via Zoom. It's like massive, right? That's a massive practice shift. Whether you're doing patient care online or whether you're teaching online, that's a big practice shift. So we talked about elements of humility and knowing that the answer doesn't always need to fall with you. And in that very same session, we played and went out in some breakout rooms and did some Google Slides, and the activity didn't work very well. And I had to, like, in the moment, go in and fly in and add some new slides because I'd kind of given them the instructions, and then they went in and accidentally erased each other's work. So I had to go in quickly and then add new slides. And then after 15 minutes, I pulled them out. I'm like, so how did that go? Right? That didn't go very well, did it? Right? And we just kind of played with, okay, so, and they could see me modeling, hey, my expert hat is off and it's over here. And we are all learning together. We're in the mud together. And the sense of community that comes from that is incredible, right? You're having the courage to say, I don't have all the answers. And that's okay, because guess what? My learners are probably, my team are probably going to come up with some pretty cool ideas. And that's why you're my team, right? That's why you're here. You're skilled individual. So you can see, like, multi-levels, right? Whether you're talking about a team or you're talking a corporate team, whether you're talking about learners, there's so a cross-contact application of this. It's incredible to put yourself in a vulnerable space and create maybe psychological safety, right? The ability to speak your mind and not be judged is such a wonderful feeling in a team. Mm-hmm. Yeah, mm-hmm. Especially at a Code Blue or, those kind of pivotal moments. That's what you need in the team.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm curious to know, within your world of virtual learning in healthcare, Christy, what's the dream? This is probably your question, Lawrence. Sorry, I interrupted, but I'm in here now. I want to know where she's going with this.
Yeah. What's the dream? In terms of for what I want to see, what I'd love to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I'm seeing is, as we roll over all of these folks and try to get them the equipment that they need and get them the headsets and then we get them the training they need. As we roll over the training piece, if they're doing patient education or patient consults, which all of them are in some form, I'm rolling over some existing practice that's not very person-centered, right? Mm-hmm. Rolling over some very, judgmental, thinking that I have control over the patient. Once I tell them how to self-manage, they should be able to do this. Why aren't they absorbing this information? I'm going to give them 35 slides in an hour and a half, and they should absorb that content. Right? So my dream, and what I'm hoping for, is a bit of a reboot. And is it, the responsibility of the virtual health learning consultant to reboot person-centered care? No, but I love that any new tools that I create or resources, pragmatically, checklists and things, can be very much through the patient-centered lens as a reminder or a maybe introduction to slow down, ask, tell, ask, right? Use these models of inquiry, ensure that the message got across, because what is the point of care if it wasn't understood and the communication didn't occur? So that's my hope, is that I can support from my little role as a consultant, a bit of a refresh, a reboot, and kind of restart things in a very person-centered way, in a very odd roundabout way. Yeah.
So much of patient care takes place, 99.9% of it takes place in someone's home, away from any of us. We are such a minor player. Yeah. How do we give people the tools to manage themselves? And do they even want them? Yeah. When somebody comes to me for an appointment, if I don't ask them, I might say, why are you here? And they might say, because my husband made me. And then I say, well, what do you want from our time together? Yeah. They come up with the oddest things. And I think we start in a different place. We start with what I want. I want you to have better control of your asthma or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think, the biggest the biggest lesson learned here is when I worked with our COPD, a chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder patients, and like they're still smoking, right? Mm-hmm. The smoking cessation. If you need ever to experience not being able to talk someone into a behavior change, you just go right ahead and practice smoking cessation conversations, right? Because it's complex. It's behavioral, there are programs that work, there's mindfulness programs that work. But it's so complex. Everyone's coming in with, different goals, different things they're dealing with at home. And there's no point in steamrolling in with my agenda, 0 point. You might as well just empathetically listen, meet them where they're at, set tiny little goals, and just be there to support baby steps forward. I
used to ask them, what does smoking bring you that's good? Everybody knows it makes the curtains stink and whatever. And people are very happy to tell you that because, they're so perfect. But what does it actually bring you? And I've had people say, oh, it's my best friend. Oh, when the family are all squabbling after dinner while they're doing the dishes, I can go out onto the balcony. I can have a cigarette and I can escape. That's so many different stories about what it is that having a cigarette provides for somebody. And until they express it, they have no knowledge of what they might need to replace when they become an ex-smoker. It's just such a cool thing to see that actually smoking has a role for many people. Not that I'm advocating smoking, but if we're assisting people to become ex-smokers, then we have to try to help them find what they need. Yeah,
that's great. I don't know if either of you had read one of my favorite books, and now I just watch little videos, is James Clear's Atomic Habits. Have you read that book? Oh, such a good book. That's a life changer. Like I think that's
year ago.
Mandatory reading for everybody, right?
I was going to show you my copy, but it's an audiobook.
Oh, is it audiobook?
It's an audio. Yeah. Such a good book. Yeah.
It's a great book. Hey. And I was listening to like a really short YouTube video yesterday, and someone had captured bits and pieces of him talking from different lectures and gone through his, I can't remember if it was 10 points or 10 tips or something like that to create good habits. But it's so usable in even when you're thinking through this patient-centered lens of coaching self-management, there's good stuff in there that you can apply with your patients, hands down. It's great.
Absolutely. Excellent book. Shout out for James Clear, Atomic Habits.
Yeah. Yeah, he's brilliant.
Oh, there he goes. Yeah. Cue, craving, reward, response, and hooking a new thing that we want to make a habit to an existing daily thing. Like taking your inhaler immediately before you brush your teeth. Like don't brush your teeth till you've done it, kind of thing, or whatever. Yeah.
Some great tips in there.
After I read his book, I moved my treadmill from my basement into the pathway of where my foyer is, because then it was visible and it got used. So environmental design comes into some of the change ideas. There's so much of this cue, craving, response, reward that fits into system redesign and human factors design principles when we're designing healthcare environments, as well as you just said, and the concept of habit stacking. Is there a habit you already do? Stack it on top a new habit that you want to create, and then intentionally being able to redesign the schedule of your life. Fantastic book. Not completely new concepts, but definitely framed and packaged in a way that was really accessible. A fantastic, great resource.
Very simple. Yeah.
Go ahead, Anne.
I was going to ask.
Christy.
So Anne, in terms of when did you finish your coaching program?
This time last year.
Oh, wow.
Not very long ago. I had done do you remember PMI, Lawrence, the Physician Manager Institute? It seems to have been divided up into a whole bunch of different things now that are scattered, which I think is a shame. But it used to be just for physicians, paid for by the CMA and by our fees to attend workshops and things. I went to one of those a year from just before I started my first leadership role at Surrey Hospital. And the last one I went to was just after I had handed over the head of the Department of Medicine role for Fraser Health to John Diggle, who's the current regional head. And the 2-day workshop was the physician as coach. And much of what's we've talked about this evening was kind of covered. But all the way through that was when I had my aha moment. That was in 2015. And I thought, oh my goodness, I think I've been pretty clumsily and without knowing it, but this is what I've been doing with the Department of Medicine. I love these guys and I really want, I want it all to work, and from then on, that was the seed. And I thought, okay, so I want to do this in the future. How and when? And I was getting all teed up to attend formal training, being the same kind of person about credibility and getting more and more education. I really wanted to get some good schooling. And then every year something would happen. My brother-in-law got sick. My mom needed some surgery. My brother-in-law died, and things would happen that derailed me actually beginning. So I did it last year. And so I signed up in January and everything was going well. And I was diving down rabbit holes on the Royal Roads learning platform when they do they give you a massive amount of orientation that you can do. And there's a link here and then a link there and then a link there. And you can just go in this mess of holes that's like being in those catacombs or something under the ground. Nevertheless, and then I had my mammogram and got diagnosed with breast cancer. And I thought, oh, I am not putting this off one more year. Wow. I had arranged a 0.5 job share with the very lovely and incredibly talented Kiran Saini, who's doing a master's in medical education, which I hope she's finished or almost finished now. And she's going to be such a good get for Surrey Hospital if she's taken on board. And she's a great respirologist. She had agreed to do a 0.5 job share. And so for the first couple of months, she was there alone after my surgeries. And I just thought, I'm going to stick to one thing. I'm going to stick to the future while I recover. And I'll see about working half-time in November or December, which was this time last year. And I couldn't make it work. I could not make it work. And I thought, no, just one career at a time is enough for me, or one focus, really. It's the same career. It's very much the same purpose. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was the coaching, and, incredible self-learning going along with doing the coaching work. So much. They call it self-mastery, but I think mastery is the wrong word. It's more investigation and peeling the onion, and who knew how many layers, and all of them hurt. There you go.
Oh, that's interesting.
I want to offer you a reflection that I may not have ever offered you, Anne. But yes, we did meet like off and on since 2012 in the hospital. And I always remembered you as someone who always had a lot of passion. Like there's always passion coming through. And it was often an indignance that I sensed from you because of some injustice in our system.
Yeah.
That's always what it was. There was always almost a seething undertone of why is this happening? And it was, I wasn't fully able to grasp it, but I've noticed that since you've done the coaching program, you've really zenned out. It's fantastic.
I think part of that also is just having some enforced quiet time and making a decision what to spend my energy on. I loved the leadership role. I loved spending energy on helping the groups and the leaders develop themselves and one another. Absolutely adored that. But yeah, lots of frustration about inefficiencies and the gap between people's ideals and what we say we're doing and what organizationally and politically we are either inhibited from doing or not supported to do. Yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of frustration about some of those things. So the waste of energy. Yeah. I am one of those people who wakes up pretty happy in the morning when I come to, somewhere during the second cup of tea. But but there's a lot to be said for being alive.
And you just mentioned you're still in the same career. The purpose remains the same. And I couldn't agree more, because you are supporting the exact same system, but at a level where you're filling a gap that was never filled before. You are providing a form of accelerated learning for every physician leader that you contact. Some safe spaces that they couldn't access before, where they could come to some of those realizations, maybe even face some of their ego demons, and maybe some recognize what the inner child really needs at this moment. You have been able to facilitate that for me historically. That was maybe about a year ago when you had just going through your training, and it was profoundly helpful. So you have great talent there, and I'm so excited that you're in the system. And thank you for doing what you're doing and devoting yourself to it.
Thank you, Lawrence, for that acknowledgement. I want for my colleagues is that people have a clear sense of their own strengths and their own purpose, and that they find a way to live their life and do their work and manage their connections and everything in a way that brings them great pleasure. I mean, to the point of joy, those things that we happen on, hopefully every day at work, that just make you feel warm inside. Yeah.
We deserve to have joy at work. I absolutely believe that. And the fact that so many people are ashamed to say, I want to have joy at work, that makes me angry. And I'm so glad that you suggested that it's possible, because I think it is. Yeah. I think it is. And it depends on that right environmental contagions within, or emotional contagions within the environment. That's often the tone. The biggest lever for emotional contagion is the leadership in there. Concept.
Yeah, I agree. I think what's been really great for me is working in the care system as a provider, and kind of like complaining upward, going, what are those people up in corporate doing? Like, this is yet another process that is constraining my ability to take care of my patient to the best of my ability. And then now flipping that on its head and being in corporate and going, oh, okay, this is what they're doing up here, right? And having that other lens. And I think it's the IHI, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, and their joy in work. When I was briefly with the quality team, reading about that, I'm like, this is so vital. And I think last year I felt like this reflection when I was reading that work, going, there could be so much learned if after every single shift we were given the opportunity to gather collectively and reflect and have a conversation about what went well and what really was sucking today in the shift, like what went really poorly, and given a safe space to do that. And I would love to see coaches in those frontline teams help facilitate those conversations. I think that would be like transformational for us to sit and reflect and have these like really real discussions, but be given a safe space to do so, because that takes skill to hold, psychological safety in these discussions. Yeah. Because there's so much to be learned.
Yeah, there is. There's a historically, there was a bunch of papers written about Schwartz rounds, much the same, in environments that lend themselves to that, such as, an ICU, pediatric ICU, Christy, that's perfect environment, or a critical care unit, a unit or an emergency room where you have a team that are kind of on a similar shift. If you want to have the whole team, including the cleaner and the doctor and the nursing staff and the physio, everyone involved and the clerks, somehow these things have to be fit in and the timing has to work. And there's been great support from exactly these things. Did you hear that? Hello from downstairs. Anyway, just great things written. And I believe that I don't really even know whether you need a coach for that, or just somebody who is able to help everybody find the space. Perhaps our leadership people are being coached now in order to have the ability to build safe spaces, but it's something we have to do rather than say. And I think the doing of creating a safe space takes time and energy in building that. And I think maybe that's where coaching and education and a combination of all of it may have a role. Yeah, there you go, Lawrence. I'm seeing that you've got that up there about the Schwartz rounds. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Definitely the experience that I had, that frustration of lack of time to emotionally care for patients, too high of patient load, all things that we kind of need to debrief and talk about in terms of quality improvement too, right? Like what little small cycles of change and tests can we throw at it and try what makes improvement. Yeah. And so pleased to have gone through and worked with the quality team for even just a short period of time before I got into the virtual health team, because of course now we're looking at these complex systems and bringing in concepts of design thinking, empathy mapping, patient journey mapping into the utilization of virtual health is my passion. So I have this phenomenal group of networked super users at Fraser. I call the Virtual Health Alliance, and they're a growing team of supports at the front line who are super users in how to use virtual. And they help each other, but we bring them in for live meetings every month. And they're linked, unfortunately, by SharePoint right now, but eventually we'll get them on a Teams chat channel and they'll be able to kind of leverage that community connection, reach out for troubleshooting ideas, and they're all learning from each other. But we did an empathy mapping session in our last live meeting.
What is empathy mapping, Christy?
Yeah, so this is so cool. So empathy mapping is a component of the design thinking process where particularly let's talk about patient empathy mapping. So yeah, go ahead, Lawrence, if you want to pull up the graph there. You place yourself in the shoes of the patient, and the graphic, if you do a Google search, will show a little head at the center, and then it shows all around the outside, what is the patient in the steps of their journey. Say it's in a specific care area. Let's say it's dialysis, the dialysis process, home dialysis, or coming in for dialysis. Like what do they do? What do they hear from their peers, from their boss, from their family? What are they saying? Like, what are the things that they're saying to you when you're talking to them? Are there complaints? Are there thoughts? Are there ideas? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? And really placing yourself deeply in their shoes, and then just like mapping out what you think they might be. So it's that empathetic lens, that comes from the design industry of, like if you're looking at consumers, like what are our consumers thinking? So using that in patient care can be really pivotal. And I had a dietitian on the call and who said, this was really like, I've never done that before, where I thought, okay, I'm 13. I'm 13-year-old and I'm an adolescent and you're coaching me on healthy diet. Yeah. What am I thinking? What am I hearing? this is a really different way to think. So just kind of giving them those tools. I'm hoping to do a bit more deeper dive into patient journey mapping next. So that's like walking the experience like through the system from, the moment you come to say it's a clinic door, and what happens and what are the highs, what are the lows, and where are the improvements. And as you map it, you can see where the easy improvement points might be. And Andrew Siu he used to be with Emily Carr School of Design, and I think he's with the BC Patient Safety and Quality Council now. Does a phenomenal job he's done it for Alberta Health Services Quality Forum. He's done it at our Quality Forum here in BC, of demonstrating journey mappings, if you ever get the chance to watch one of his videos.
No, I'm going to look at this.
Shout out to Andrew Siu.
Shout out to Andrew Siu. Yeah.
Yeah.
So all these tools that we can use really to make care improvements are exciting to me.
Yeah.
Because they're so applicable to, the skill of empathy crosses all contexts. Whether it's working with a team, working with patients, working with my husband and my children.
Yeah. Mm. And empathy and compassion are kind of constant companions. This reminds me a little bit of the experience cube, which is, front and center of my mind, because it was something that Elizabeth Froese and I were discussing last night with a group of doctors from White Rock, where, your experience has multiple different contributors, and you can try to stop for a moment and dissect your own experience. What am I seeing? What am I thinking? What do I want? How is it making me feel? And it's interesting to see it translated into empathy and in a number of different ways. These things are all connected, trying to put ourselves in others' shoes, but also remain distinct enough to be useful in some way, but in their shoes enough to be able to connect with them.
So much of these techniques seem to be about really deconstructing what is needed at the moment in terms of design to most meet the needs of the end user of the system. Mm-hmm. And with the Experience Cube, it's like being able to observe from a meta level, and to observe and then after becoming aware of the various major environmental factors that are playing into our experience, and then having the agency to intentionally shift those situations, or create an action plan to shift those.
Yeah. And as the very wise Dr. Froese points out, gives you just a moment to pause and some kind of structure to get the chaos out of your head. So maybe you can move forwards in a non-reactive way, in a productive way.
Yeah. The first time I ever fully used the Experience Cube was several years ago. And I think it was, I can't remember the first time I came across it in some sort of training class in Fraser Health. And I actually used it with my husband, and he'd left the towel on the floor again. And I said, and they had taught us to physically imagine there was a square on the floor. And because you're using your body, you're getting a little bit out of your head, you're using your body. And so it's observations, thoughts, feelings, right? So I stepped into one area and I said, I see that you've left your towel on the floor again.
With just that tone of
and then
voice?
I went over, and then I went over to thoughts, and I'm like, I think that you just got busy this morning and it was a rush morning, and et cetera, right? And then I stepped back into the back right quadrant and said, I feel really frustrated. Right? And it worked brilliantly because it got me moving, and it got me, not yelling and not reactive, but very clear on my communication. So it has multiple uses, that Experience Cube. I love it.
And within the use of that Experience Cube, you've eliminated blame, essentially. You've asked questions. You give a chance to the other to verify your presumptions and your thoughts.
Yeah, and what you're stating your experience from my point of view.
Yes.
I'm seeing this. I'm thinking this. I'm wondering if you just don't care if all the towels start to get that hideous smell when they're damp and don't get dry. Like I'm assuming you either can't smell it or you don't care. And it's, this is what I'm thinking. And it's about me. It's not about you. I'm not saying you're an idiot. Pick up your towel.
Yeah.
It's
true. It's very functional. Great.
And in those challenging conversations we have as leaders in teams, that skill set is fantastically practical and useful.
Yeah.
Very. Yeah.
Last night we were talking about it in the context of initiating conversations. Lawrence, I think you were at a similar webinar a while ago when we were talking about pulling on some courage to have a conversation at work when somebody looks, maybe a little off, or you're a bit worried about them, and usually, we'd stick our head in the sand and say, not my business, when someone we know reasonably well, who's usually, mild-mannered, kind of has an explosion or treats somebody badly or yells or does something really unusual. And if we use the experience cube, it gives us a way to start being a compassionate colleague, maybe wait for a time when we're just together with that person and say, I saw this happen earlier. It seemed unusual for you. It made me feel a little uncomfortable. I was thinking that maybe something's pushing your buttons right now. And what I want, or what I'm wondering about, is if we could get together, talk about it, or if you need anything, if I can help. And we find that so hard to do for one another.
Yeah.
But it's the beginning of a new world when we do it regularly.
Absolutely. And if we don't support each other, I don't think we can expect someone to helicopter in and support us. And shifting culture, I think, begins with that type of pure connection and pure support. So I'm so impressed that yourself and Dr. Froese are doing that type of work. I think it's cutting edge. It's unfortunately cutting edge.
There she is.
Yeah, that's Dr. Froese who has been sometimes your partner in crime and in facilitating safe spaces for people to explore and reflect.
Yeah. She's a goddess. I am learning so much from her.
That's amazing.
I shout out to this.
Do you both must read Brené Brown? Do you know Brené Brown's work?
I have Dare to Lead. I have not read it, but I flipped to the values page because Anne made me.
Me too. So
she offered me the opportunity and I took it.
Yeah.
The if you like her delicious Southern accent, which I really do, I love the song nature of her voice. Yeah. The audiobook of Dare to Lead is great. My husband and I listened to it on the way to and from Osoyoos in the summer.
Oh, awesome.
We went for a weekend, and he's an engineer. They're not known for like voluntarily seeking Brené Brown out. But he was listening and found all kinds of things that seemed to resonate. She's written some wonderful books. She's very straightforward. Yeah. And Dare to Lead kind of summarizes everything that I think she's written in all her previous books. Yeah,
it does. And it's interesting. My journey to Brené Brown came interestingly. Someone gave me her book, The Gifts of Imperfection. And sometimes when you read something and it just doesn't resonate at that time. And then I picked it up and I was like, I don't understand what she's talking about. And then 2 years later, I think it was after I'd had my first child or maybe my second child, I was on a mat leave. I was cleaning and I picked up this book, The Gifts of Imperfection, and I picked it up and it was exactly what I needed to read at that exact time in my life. And I sequentially went through her books as I sort of recuperated and rehabilitated myself from this traumatic experience at my work. And I skipped a book by accident. I went to the library one day and I'm like, oh, I can't remember if it was like Braving the Wilderness. And I actually skipped a book and I thought, well, I think there's one before that, but it should be fine. I'll just skip one. And I read it and then I kind of went forward and I'm like, I just felt like I was missing something in my journey and my thought process. And I went back and read, I think it's the third one, something about rumbling. It's called Rumbling in the title. I can't remember it.
And the way she refers to things as being rumbles.
Yeah. And that was the gap. That was what I was missing. I went back and read the book in the same order. And I was like, oh, that was the skill that I didn't have, that I needed, and went forward. And Dare to Lead, you're right. It brings everything together. And she has a great framing for what we're talking about, this type of unarmored leadership. And she says, strong back, soft front, wild heart. It's one of my favorite sayings.
Strong back, soft heart. Soft
front. Wild heart.
Right back, front.
Because the last thing you want is armor out front of you, right? You don't want to be unapproachable. Yeah. You don't want to be hard. You want to have a strong spine, have strong boundaries so that you're not taken advantage of. But at the same time, a soft front that's approachable, kind, empathetic, and a wild heart that can be creative and free and imaginative and not constrained by ego, by what you think you're supposed to be saying and what's supposed to be doing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think as a person who really likes to overanalyze things, having that soft front allows us to embrace the fact that we may not have the answer, but there's somebody in the team that has that better answer. So it is a very inclusive type of leadership behavior that really recognizes the strengths in others and empowers others to be there to create and co-create those solutions that actually will probably fit the system a lot better. It recognizes the power in cognitive diversity. And then I think the wild heart is about let's be okay with being different from what's normal. Let's be okay with positive deviance. Let's deviate from what's typically done to create something more positive. I think that's a fantastic one. I'd never heard of that, but I'm definitely going to be looking into it.
Those words didn't stick with me either from her books, but it's what I was thinking about the words. I wrote them down. You could probably tell that, but I was thinking it's really, I find it incredibly entertaining that we can read the same book, we can look at the same flower or the same thing, and we can be struck by a completely different part of it. I can look at a bumblebee outside and my husband can look at the same bumblebee and we will both comment on something completely different and be in awe of it. But something different will resonate with each of us. And what's lovely, I think, about Brené Brown is that she has created an ability to resonate with a lot of people from diverse backgrounds. I know there are lots, and particularly in the physician world, who might think, oh, she's a bit hippy-dippy, But the first experience I had of her was somebody had talked about her to me, and I had watched the original TED Talk.
Right.
That she talks about in her audiobook, doing this TED Talk, and she was just beside herself with concern because she didn't know how well it was going to go and everything. And talking about the vulnerability of that uncertainty that you feel with public speaking or with whatever you're doing that's new. The first central line you put in, the first arterial blood gas you take as a respiratory therapist. The first time you listen to heart sounds and you think, is this what I'm supposed to hear? And you're in the dark. No idea. But she seems to, that TED Talk right there, that one at the top, where she's all in brown, Brené Brown, and she's talking about how she was she's a happiness researcher.
And game researcher as well,
and she segued into relationships to happiness to vulnerability in a moment. And,
Yeah. Yeah. Like her research on wholehearted living, when she dug into the data, basically showed that to live a wholehearted life, you needed to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And be aware of where and when you felt shame. And that one talk where she's wearing brown, and the subsequent one afterwards, like after the fact, where she thought maybe there'd be 300 or 400 or 600 people that maybe watched it, and all these critics, millions of viewers, right? The one in the jean jacket is the next one. And it's just, they're phenomenal. Yeah. But when I read her in Dare to Lead, she lists out characteristics. I think there's 10 or 11 or 12 of them of armored leadership. Yes. There's a massive amount of resonance there for how I have witnessed healthcare leadership in terms of armoring up. Perfectionism, fostering fear of failure. Yes. Cynicism, criticism as self-protection. Like, you just go down the list, right? Yeah. And then she gives the opposite. So instead of driving perfectionism, being empathetic, self-compassion, striving for something that's healthy. Yeah. She gives the opposite to, there we go. Daring leadership versus armored leadership. Being a knower and being right is armored, and daring leadership is being a learner and getting it right. Yeah. So we talked about that in this morning's session with my community practice, right? Like, we're all here to learn. This is this new world, this post-COVID space of chaotic virtual care.
It is chaotic, and there's we were talking earlier about what the medical world is like right now, and it almost seems like there's a bit of a crack in some of this armor, like a crack across the board, where people, in my experience, people seem to just have. There's just been a little shake, like a little earthquake, and there's a little crack, or the house is shifting. Yeah. It's almost as if people are ready to just embrace a little bit of learning about ourselves that might help ourselves and our families and our children and our communities get closer to our calling or our purpose, or at least our dreams. Yeah, that's great. That's exciting. The cracks are where the light gets in, right? Is that the saying? Yeah. The cracks are where the light comes in. So that's wonderful. Right. Yeah. Interesting, right? How do we use that sense of urgency that people seem to have? How do we urgently help? Where do we go? What do we do? What do we all do together to change or to build on what's already strong and make it stronger? Yeah, it's wonderful.
I pulled up this image. It's plus delta. It's something I've seen at some of the Institute of Healthcare Improvement things. And it reminded me of what you had mentioned, Christy, about at the end of the day, huddling with your team and saying, what should we do more of? And potentially, what should we change? Yeah. I think that was a nice tool that I'd seen. Yeah, the plus delta is wonderful. We use that in neonatal resuscitation program debriefs, right? Wow. So we'll put everybody in front of a camera and we'll do a mock code pink. And then we videotape it just to torture you a little bit. And then we very quickly whisk you all off to a table, re-watch the recording. But before we press play, we do up on the whiteboard plus delta, like what went well about that, but what would you change? So that's a wonderful debrief tool. Yeah. It's a great debrief tool for everything, almost everything. Yeah. 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 I think it's very positively framed as well, and allows people to speak in a way that facilitates some safety in what could otherwise be sometimes construed as criticism Yeah, safe learning spaces are really key. And I think, if we go back to education, because that's always where I lean, setting up the expectation for these safe learning environments. I did my thesis through Rural Roads. So I took the thesis track and I did some primary research with the NRP program actually at Fraser Health. Sorry, it's my phone. It's okay. So my thesis was on the use of, I had taught NRP because I was an RT. I felt like I had something to prove. So I taught an exceptionally high amount of courses over the course of 4 years. Instead of teaching 3 per year, I taught like 2 per month. And to do that, I had to teach at 5 different sites.
right? Because you had to move around and go where the classes were. So when I did that, I saw very different methods of the facilitators sort of setting up the space with confidentiality agreement, with expectations and safe, vulnerable, safe spaces to express your thoughts and ideas, but also make a mistake. So my thesis research was about, basically I built an online pre-briefing. So instead of focusing on the debrief, I dove into the research and found, okay, there's a bit of a gap here with the pre-briefing. Like, how can we leverage this preparation for the learners in the pre-brief? So it's a blended learning program. So they would do some online work, do an online exam, and then before the in-person training day, they would take my quick 20-minute module that I built them online on Learning Hub. And it basically had like the confidentiality agreement, the expectations for the day, the rubric on how they were going to be assessed. I set them up to know that this day is about you and your learning, right? So you're there to test, to play. If you don't know the equipment, you ask, like, I need to review this equipment. It sort of empowered them a little bit. And then I just did qualitative research, qualitative interviews on their experience of what that course was designed, how we can make improvements in the course, and then also how the course might have impacted, like, did that impact your psychological safety in the in-person training day? And in two of my interviews, I had a very small sample, but in two of my interviews, I had descriptions from one in particular who, before the previous year, when she'd done her training in NRP, she sat in the car shaking with fear and anxiety before she went into the training class. So if that can happen, we know that we're not setting up a safe learning environment, right? And, this is just training. She was terrified to take the training, not terrified to go to an actual infant resuscitation, but terrified to take the training. So I think we can model this, behavior at so many different levels of medical learning and leadership, right? Like from the moment you're a student, we can model these things and shift just a little bit.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm.
I'd love to look at that. It sounds like a wonderful thing to do before any kind of learning experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think every province sets it up a little bit differently. But I get to present to the Canadian Pediatric Society next week. And so that's exciting. I talk to them about the research a bit and see where that might take us, because pre-briefing is really sort of, I think, on the up and coming area for examination. We've really researched debrief and simulation extensively, and then setting up a scenario in simulation. But the pre-brief and how we can leverage that for great learning is yet to be a bit more deeper explored. Mm-hmm. Lawrence is digging away. That's something.
You've mentioned psychological safety many times, and just coincidentally, I've recently been asked to join a Doctors of British Columbia psychological safety working group.
Cool.
I have no idea what practically we're going to be able to do. I don't know if I've discussed this with you yet, and I don't know, because I'm thinking that coaching has a part to play in a psychological safety action plan. Meaning, if we're trying to increase psychological safety in the workplace, that coaching might play a role in that. What, Christy, you've used the term quite a few times, psychological safety. What does it mean to you? Does this image resonate with your understanding of it, or do you have a better?
Yeah, I think when I describe it, it's an ability to share your ideas, your thoughts, without feeling that you're going to be judged. Period. What comes out of my mouth won't be judged. Whatever the idea, the thought, right? Because we want to, specifically in this kind of a training environment, maybe let's say 5 years ago, I was at a resuscitation and I was with a team who was a high functioning team. And maybe there was a neonatologist there, and I saw him do something in the algorithm or in his care. And I respect him and he's an excellent practitioner. But yet there's something that I'm like, oh, I didn't think you were supposed to do that particular, oh, that's new. But then perhaps I think, I build that into my mental model of what I think the care practice is supposed to be. I want to be creating a learning environment where those kind of things can surface when you're training, right? Like if I'm in the middle of an algorithm and I do something really odd, I want someone to be able to, stop and say, hey, I saw you do this. And like, is that right? I like another learner, right? If I'm facilitating, I want another learner to feel like they can question what they just saw, because this training environment is where we're prepping you for the real world. We don't want you making mistakes on the infants out there. We want you to screw up here. And it's beautiful when someone makes a big, I call a big hairy mistake in a simulation class. It's beautiful because the learning, and sometimes there's an intense emotion attached to it, and you can just see that they're never going to forget and never going to do that again. But that's exactly what you want from those spaces. So yeah, this model that you have up here, comfort admitting mistakes, but comfortable just speaking your mind and saying what's on your mind and saying what you're thinking without feeling like there'll be repercussions, consequences, judgment. That to me. And then, everyone learning from it, not just me. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it.
I think in some of my experience with the medical education field, that there is that, as we talked about earlier, that toxic perfectionism ideal. And then there's also the individualistic solo hero ideal that everybody is imagining themselves to be the person who saves the day and who knows all. And I think that psychological safety breaks through that, and it fosters self-compassion when we make errors, or when we need to be vulnerable and say, I don't know something. And then if somebody was to argue that we can't do it like that, there's not enough time for something like that, we're in a war zone right now, we can't have that kind of stuff. But then the flip side on this model, it says that everyone starts to openly share ideas instead of only a few people sharing ideas. So we'll get more ideas into the mixer, and better innovation and better decision-making comes out. So effectively, we potentially will produce better products, and better products meaning better services that are more tailored to the needs of the patient, and therefore fulfilling our mandate as health professional providers. Yeah. And I think that connection is not always clear in that of why psychological safety is such a foundational ideal for what our leaders ought to create.
Yeah, I think in the example of like a code blue, my favorite code blues ever, where I feel like, oh, thank God that anxiety and that moral distress comes off, is when the doctor who's leading says, if you see something that I don't see, or if you think of something that I don't think of, say something. Like straight up in the beginning of the code, right? Like as you're prepping everyone and you're waiting for the patient to be off the stretcher onto the bed, he's like, I want to hear all your ideas. Or like you're at the end of your algorithm and he's got nothing left. He's like, am I missing something? Right? Like just so vulnerable. Be like, I don't know, guys, like any ideas? I'm willing to listen. So those are my favorite, because I've been at so many, oh my gosh, so many where we knew that what they were doing was wrong. Like I went to an infant resus once where it was a placental abruption. It was a horrible abruption. And we were all kind of in OR in the ante room and had our, hats on and our masks on. And the physician came over and he said, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do 30-second cycles of CPAP with PPV, positive pressure ventilation. And we all looked at each other. No one said anything. We all looked at each other with our masks on and our hats and our eyes. We all looked at each other and our eyes were like, what is he talking about? That is not the algorithm for NRP. But we said nothing. But when the baby came out, we took over with our hands and did NRP. But no one called it out, right? So the moral distress that sits in your head is not okay. Right? You want to be in an environment where you're saying to your team, listen, you all are experienced. Let's pull on the wealth of your knowledge and your talents and your abilities all together for the benefit of this infant or the benefit of this patient. That is the goal. And that, years ago. When was that? Oh my gosh, the first time we started to look at quality improvement and safety in healthcare, and equivocated to the airline industry, right? There needs to be an ability for absolutely everyone to vocalize when they see something wrong. So, there's such a great space for improvement there. And everyone's happier when there's more vulnerability and a lot more teamwork going on at the bedside.
And absolutely, that moral distress, that accumulation of potentially negative outcomes, or at least outcomes that don't match with the ideals that you came into this job hoping to make. When they accumulate, just spiritually, it's like you can't really continue to function at a high level. I feel like it weighs on you. It's like a heavy weight. And I've experienced that myself as a family physician in a highly complex environment of North Surrey, bringing a ton of idealism into my work, but also a ton of toxic perfectionism, and just kind of destroying myself internally from self-criticism, not understanding the concept of self-compassion and bringing psychological safety for myself, treating myself as I would treat a friend or a colleague. I didn't have that type of self-talk, and it's taken me a few years to develop that. And what ended up happening is that I would come to work, I would be present at work, but I wouldn't be functioning at the highest level that I could actually produce. I wasn't actually creating effective, trusting relationships with my patients as I could have if I didn't have that accumulation of moral distress burden. And it really took until I took time away from practice to really deal with some of that distress in a healthier way, that I could come back and to be fully present and actually to be functioning at a much higher level, effective with my patients, creating great, authentic trust relationships, prescribing safer treatment plans, and developing co-created goals of care. I didn't have room or capacity for that when I was under all that distress. And I felt like I was in a vacuum of leadership at that time. Like as a family physician, without often contact in the physician's lounge of the hospitals, you can become so isolated. And thankfully, after I started joining the hospital and really creating connections with the multidisciplinary teams, is when I really started to feel more connected and started healing and getting much more effective.
There's such strength in community.
There really is. You're working, Christy, now in developing virtual teaching, and Anne has been on a journey in virtual or using Zoom as a platform for coaching. And we were on a prior call, Anne and I was commending her on her fantastic ability to use Zoom in her coaching and team facilitation. It's really neat how Anne's able to respond to chats that are coming in, and she watches the chat box, and as well as facilitate groups to speak. So it would be really neat if maybe one time you guys get to share some of your best practices on Zoom.
Is that okay now?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah.
We any reflections on your learning experience and for delivering services over Zoom?
Over Zoom. I have been amongst the world's slowest adopters of the computer and the virtual world. I spent many, many, many years saying, Eric, will you please check my email and just print the ones from my family, and I'll cook dinner. I love cooking, so what's with that? Anyway, and fighting with the computer and growling at it and thinking, I don't want to learn that. This is too annoying. But one of the decisions I made when I attended the Royal Roads course is that I was going to make it my business to learn and to approach anything to do with the computer stuff that I needed to do with a learner mindset, because, I'm getting old, but I'm young compared with my mother and my mother-in-law. So I want to continue to be able to communicate with the younger people. I see, and I see a fresh, vibrant, idealistic, loving, connection forward group of young individuals coming into the medical world all around. These youngsters in their 20s and 30s are so full of life and a desire to look after one another and themselves and the world in a very different way, perhaps from the way, my lot of tail-end baby boomers did what we were told and did the same. I mean, really, with the same ideals, but I'm not wanting to lose the ability to communicate with the youngsters, so any opportunity now to learn language, what they're using, how to communicate with the younger people to help them move forward, all these notions. I think that everybody having a more inquiring curiosity learner approach to our problems, our resuscitations, our teaching, our interaction together, our development in healthcare, dealing with the totally limited resources we've got, and the idea that seems to be out there that there should be infinite healthcare for everybody to get everything, and there can't be. I'm looking to the youngsters to find ways around this by working together in a different way. So the Zoom platform is, one of the video conferencing platforms. I still don't know how to use a Miro board, and I'm not confident about setting up breakout rooms. I need lots of practice, or I need to have somebody with me who loves doing that, but I would like to know how to do that. I would like to have time to suck up that pain and become good at all of it. But the Zoom thing is really different. I don't know. I'm not in the least photogenic. You could tell that, but I am me.
Untrue.
And I really don't mind. I don't like having photos taken, but this I don't mind, because I feel like I'm just being me. This is all I got. If I can't be face to face, then this is me. And maybe the whole Zoom thing is just that I do have lots of energy. And if I'm going to be trying to help people on Zoom with their learning or talking about something new or interacting together, I really want to nurture that. I don't want to be too soft. I don't want to be too directive. I want to be me. I want to say, let's do this. Coaching over Zoom is different, because looking at the camera instead of looking at you is unnerving. But for you to feel looked at, then I need to look away from you, and that's really hard. But the teaching sessions and webinars, which really shouldn't be coaching unless people have agreed to be coached, I think that's easier. And for whatever reason, I think the energy that I bring to various meetings on Zoom is sometimes effective in the same way that it was when I was doing face-to-face talks at the Villa Verde in
Yes.
Surrey in the old days with a pharmaceutical resonant theme, or talking about COPD or guidelines or something. If I'm being me, that works. If I'm trying to be the teacher or somebody else, it falls flat.
Absolutely.
So I think at the things that you're at, Lawrence, I think part of the joy in that is that I know almost everyone there. And I have to say, I love my people, the people that I've worked with, the ICU nursing staff who are gradually all retiring, but I see on Facebook, and this is like home to me. These people doctors who've referred patients to me, and they've talked about their doctors in my office. And I feel like I know people so well because I've had so much secondhand information and phone calls and visits. Christy, I'm sure it's the same for you. You bring your own self to your virtual teaching environment. And it's, other than the fact that I don't have legs and I rarely have hands, that it's just the same. It's as close as we can get, and the quality has become better. Yeah. Bigger groups are hard when you have 25 people and you're peering at someone like this.
Yeah. You're fantastic at it, and you are fantastic at it. Yeah.
It's too much fun.
That's great. No, it's a good platform. I think we were talking about this. I think my brother-in-law were chatting about this the other day, and I'm actually speaking to the Jewel Physician Leadership Group on Friday morning with the head of the Masters of Arts in Learning and Technology program at Royal Road. She asked me to co-facilitate her, the hour session that we have. So that's exciting. Speaking to them about transitioning to virtual teaching. And we were talking about this and okay, so if you're having a hard time in transitioning to this virtual environment, I wonder, is there a familiarity, a comfort, an ease of walking into a room and not really needing to do any prep and leveraging that or leaning into that crutch of being able to work the room and being charismatic, right? That you just doesn't translate over to Zoom. And suddenly it's a little bit of work. And maybe the slides that you put together are way too much text and you don't know where to grab photos. So it's interesting, right? It's work, and it requires you to take off that expert hat and bring yourself back down to novice again. But the fun of it, I think, and how we framed it today with this educator community practice, the fun of it is just screwing up together, playing together. We go into this Google Slides activity in the breakout room, and it didn't work very well. And I kind of flew into the slides really quickly and fixed them, and then popped into all the breakout rooms and said, okay, I fixed it. You're good. Is everyone, because they were accidentally erasing each other's content. So, and then we came back and we debriefed a bit. So how'd that go? What went well, what didn't go? So it was a really playful environment. So I was modeling for them that, even when I'm not presenting myself super polished and clean, everybody learned something from that, right? It didn't matter. It's not supposed to be polished, right? It's going to take us years to get to expert level with this. And then they're going to change the platform on us, and we're going to have to, bring in VR or something, right? We'll be using VR. But yeah, I think that there's some really key things that we need to translate over. And pragmatically, it's whatever curriculum you had, it's going to have to change. You can't teach an hour and a half session or 2 hours anymore. It has to be shorter, has to be visual, has to be engaging. You've got to use annotations. You've got to use breakout rooms and get comfortable with them and get comfortable at screwing up and just inviting everyone to talk about how that went and what you would take away from it. So yeah, I think what I love about Zoom, and I've said this in meetings before, because we're still in that kind of unknown space of is Zoom sticking around forever in Fraser Health or not, is in Zoom, I can create community. In other tools, if they have the same capabilities and affordances, if I can use breakout rooms and if I can annotate, if these are the things that allow me to create community right now. And so I think there'll be a combination of tools that we can use, like Microsoft Teams might be where we have these interesting conversations that are very specific and we can share resources and files there. But Zoom to me is my community creating space right now. So that's what I love about this tool.
Mm-hmm. That's a great way to put it, Christy. I think you hit the nail right on the head about community. I think, that's the word. There are a lot of people who say, virtual meetings, you don't really get that sense of seeing or feeling people. And I think you do if you have your video on and if you're not too fussed about just being yourself and, occasionally being heard, breathing heavily, or these weird things that happen in Zoom, or creating accidental feedback.
Remembering that you don't have any pants on, and it's like walking up to the door and everyone going, whoa, hey.
Nice.
Exactly.
There have been some great accidental Zoom moments. I've seen a lot online, and very impressive.
There is nothing inappropriate on my bookshelves. So don't bother looking.
Zoom in, zoom in.
Zoom in.
I really want to thank you guys for the wonderful discussion we've had tonight. I hope that maybe we can do something like this again in the future if you guys have the energy. It's been fantastic learning about leadership from you guys, and about your own, a little like tiny snippet of your profound journeys in leadership and in self-discovery and in growth and in growth in humanity. So I'm so excited that both of you exist, and that both of you are nearby, and you're in my community, and you're adding to the healing of the community. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Lovely to actually meet you properly, Christy.
Yes, you too. It's great.
We'll see more of you.
Yes, I'm sure we will. Online.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Have a great night. Thank you.